In 1947, Europe was not just broken. It was hungry. Factories were damaged. Rail lines were weak. Cities were still carrying the scars of war. Governments needed food, fuel, machinery, and raw materials. But there was one problem. They did not have enough dollars. And in the new post-war world, dollars were not just another currency. They were the key to imports, the key to reserves, the key to trade, and the key to survival. So when the United States offered billions of dollars through the Marshall Plan, it sounded like charity. But it was much more than that. The money came with a system of rules, a system of supervision, a system that pushed Europe to trade more, stabilize currencies, balance budgets, and organize itself around American-backed institutions. The Marshall Plan did help rebuild Europe, but it also helped build something bigger: dollar power. After World War II, Europe needed to import almost everything. Food from abroad, fuel from abroad, machinery from abroad, raw materials from abroad. But many of those imports had to be paid for in dollars, and Europe was not earning enough of them. This became known as the dollar gap. It was not just an accounting problem, it was a political emergency. A country can print its own currency. It cannot print dollars. So European governments were trapped. If they imported what they needed, they drained their reserves. If they cut imports, factories slowed down. If factories slowed down, recovery stalled. And if recovery stalled, political pressure exploded. Washington saw the danger. A weak Europe meant weak markets. Weak markets meant fewer buyers for American goods. And weak governments meant more space for Soviet influence. So the United States made a massive offer. But the offer was not simple. America was not just sending money to rebuild roads and factories. It was sending dollars into Europe in a way that changed how Europe made decisions. The public story of the Marshall Plan is simple. America gave aid, Europe rebuilt, everyone moved on. But the real story is more interesting. In 1948, the United States passed the Foreign Assistance Act. This created the European Recovery Program, better known as the Marshall Plan. The act did not describe the program as pure humanitarian relief. It had clear goals: raise production, restore stable currencies and budgets, expand trade by reducing barriers. That matters, because from the beginning, this was not just about giving Europe dollars. It was about shaping how Europe used dollars. Each recipient country had to enter agreements with the United States. These agreements pushed governments toward exchange rate stability, budget discipline, production planning, trade cooperation, and detailed reporting. That reporting gave Washington visibility. The agreements gave Washington influence, and the dollars gave Washington power at the exact moment Europe needed them most. This is where the Marshall Plan starts to look less like a gift and more like a new operating system. Europe could get dollars, but to get them, it had to move through American-designed rules. The most powerful part of the Marshall Plan was not always the dollar itself. It was what happened after the dollar arrived. Here is the mechanism. The United States gave a European country dollar aid. That country used the dollars to pay for imports, like food, fuel, machinery, or raw materials. But inside the country, the government had to deposit an equivalent amount of local currency into a special account. These were called counterpart funds. So one flow of aid created two layers of control. First, there was the external dollar aid, used for imports. Then there was the domestic local currency fund, used inside the country. And those counterpart funds could not be used freely. They had to be used for agreed purposes: debt retirement, stabilization, investment, productivity programs, other approved domestic uses. This turned American aid into domestic influence. In Britain, a large share of counterpart funds went toward retiring public debt. In France, Washington delayed the release of counterpart funds until the government recommitted to budget discipline. In West Germany, Counterpart funds were delayed until the National Railway cut spending to match revenues. That is the hidden power of the Marshall Plan. The US was not only financing imports, it was reaching into budgets, state companies, debt policy, and domestic recovery plans. The dollars entered from outside, but the control moved inside. Europe's problem was not only trade with America. Europe also had a problem trading with itself. After the war, countries often relied on bilateral deals. One country would trade with another country directly. Payments were tightly managed. Exchange controls were everywhere. Governments tried to save every scarce dollar they could. This protected them in the short term. But it also trapped Europe in a low-trade, low-trust system. The United States wanted something else. Washington wanted Europe to trade more with itself, to lower barriers, to stop treating every payment imbalance as a crisis, to move toward a more open regional market. This is where the OEEC came in. The Organization for European Economic Cooperation was created to help coordinate the recovery program. It gave European countries a place to plan, argue, allocate aid, and work toward trade liberalization. This was not accidental. The United States wanted European initiative, but inside a dollar-backed framework. That made the plan politically smarter. It did not look like America simply commanding Europe. It looked like Europe organizing its own recovery. But the fuel was still American dollars, and the rules still pointed toward an order led by the United States. The next step was payments. Imagine France buys from Belgium. Belgium buys from the Netherlands. The Netherlands buys from Britain. Britain buys from France. If every country had to settle every imbalance immediately in dollars, trade would choke, because dollars were scarce. So Europe needed a system that allowed trade to grow without demanding instant dollar settlement every time. That system became the European Payments Union, launched in 1950. The EPU helped countries settle payments multilaterally. Instead of every country treating every deficit as a separate emergency, balances could be cleared across the system. This made trade easier. It reduced the pressure for strict bilateral controls, and it helped Europe move step by step toward currency convertibility. But notice the bigger point. This system did not replace dollar power. It managed Europe's shortage of dollars until Europe could function inside a dollar-centered world. In 1958, major European currencies finally moved toward external convertibility. That was more than a technical change. It meant Europe could now participate more fully in the post-war financial order. And the road to that moment ran through the Marshall Plan, the OEEC, and the EPU. The plan was not just an aid event. It was the opening phase of a new financial structure. Now comes the uncomfortable part. The Marshall Plan mattered, but not always in the way people think. The money was large. In the standard ERP series, aid reached about $12.7 billion over the main program years. The biggest recipients included the United Kingdom, France, West Germany, Italy and Trieste, and the Netherlands. But Europe's recovery cannot be explained by money alone. Some reconstruction was already underway. Factories were coming back. People were working. Governments were already making hard choices. The plan's deeper effect was political and institutional. It gave pro-market, anti-inflation, and trade-liberalizing forces more strength. It reduced the pressure for pure state control and strict exchange rationing. It bought time, and time mattered. Without aid, European governments faced ugly choices. Cut imports and risk slower recovery. Print money and risk inflation. Tighten controls and risk stagnation. Beg for loans and lose room to move. The Marshall Plan eased that pressure. But it did so by pushing Europe toward a specific model. More trade, more discipline, more coordination, more dependence on American dollars. So the real achievement was not that America paid Europe's bills. The real achievement was that America helped design the system through which Europe would recover. By the early 1950s, the system was working better. Not perfectly, but better. Europe's dollar gap narrowed. Exports to the United States rose. European current accounts improved. reserves started recovering in parts of Western Europe. By 1952, exports from Europe to the United States were twice their 1949 level. That sounds like Europe was escaping dollar dependence, but the deeper truth is different. Europe was learning how to earn dollars, conserve dollars, and organize trade around dollar rules. That is how dollar power became durable. Not because the United States forced every country to hold dollars at gunpoint, but because the system made the dollar the center of recovery. If a country needed imports, it needed dollars. If it needed reserves, it needed dollars. If it wanted confidence, it needed access to dollar-backed institutions. If it wanted to move toward convertibility, it had to pass through a dollar-centered framework. This is how power works in finance. It does not always look like control. Sometimes it looks like liquidity. Sometimes it looks like rules. Sometimes it looks like rescue. And sometimes rescue is the moment when the new order gets written. But this story should not be told as pure generosity. The Marshall Plan was not neutral. It rewarded countries willing to align with an American vision of recovery. Open trade, stable currencies, budget discipline, Western alignment. That made sense from Washington's point of view. But for recipient countries, it also meant that domestic policy was no longer fully domestic. American officials had a voice in how funds were used. They pushed against certain forms of nationalization. They pressured governments on budgets and trade. They supported a Europe that could stand on its own, but not outside the American-led system. There was another contradiction. Europe was being told to liberalize and earn dollars. But the United States still kept trade restrictions of its own in areas that mattered to Europe, including tariffs, quotas, shipping policy, and Buy American rules. So the order was not equal. It was stable, but asymmetric. Europe recovered. America gained markets. The dollar gained reach. And the Western Bloc gained economic structure in the Cold War. This is why the Marshall Plan remains so powerful as a historical example. It shows that aid is never just aid. When the money is large enough, scarce enough, and timed perfectly, it can shape the rules of an entire region. So how did the Marshall Plan help build dollar power? Not by making Europe poor, not by simply buying loyalty, and not by replacing every European institution with an American one. It worked in a more durable way. First, Europe faced a dollar shortage. Then the United States supplied dollars. But those dollars came with conditions: reporting, counterpart funds, trade coordination, and payment reform. That made the dollar the center of Europe's recovery process. The Marshall Plan helped Europe import what it needed, but it also changed how Europe allocated resources, how it settled payments, how it handled trade, how it stabilized currencies, how it moved toward convertibility. The aid ended. The architecture remained, and that is the real legacy. The Marshall Plan did not just rebuild factories, ports, and railways. It helped build a Western financial order where access to dollars became access to stability, trade, and trust. That is dollar power, not just the power to pay, the power to set the terms of recovery. Money does not just move markets, it moves nations. Subscribe to Mazuma Media for more stories like this.